Welcome back to the BIM Hero podcast here at the BIM Coordinator Summit 2023. In this next hour after lunch here, we're going to be talking a lot about construction and BIM coordination. Just wanted to start out with introductions for both of you.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Ian Harding. I am the BIM section head for Jacobs in Ireland. I've got maybe 10 years experience now in BIM. I've educated in Ireland, moved to Australia in 2011. I spent 9 years there working on crazy projects across many different sectors. I finished my time there in 2020. My last role there, I worked in for an asset owner, which was a unique experience in BIM, and certainly got to experience, I suppose, managing digital for a client and looking at the whole of life cycle. So I suppose I've enjoyed a journey there where I've worked in construction there. I've worked for an asset owner and then moved back to Ireland in 2020. I'm now working for Jacobs, manage a team of 14. I'm now on the project lifecycle part of it, so the design, issuing to construction, and actually then the construction management as well. So I've got a well-rounded exposure to the whole lifecycle now, which is brilliant.
Okay, and hi, my name is Moritz Mombour. I'm a registered architect. I'm from Germany, Frankfurt, and I'm working with Dress Sommer with a team of 30 talented coordinators. We're interdisciplinary design practice. So my team focuses on pipeline development, basically, and research and development for everything when it comes to architecture, structural engineering, MEP, and further on, laboratory design, and as well when it comes to sustainability, everything right now relevant. And as well, what we share and we both have in common, we're mostly active in fast-track projects.
In today's society, what does BIM coordination look like and where is it going?
Yeah, I suppose looking at it from maybe 20 years ago, it was all about CAD, right? It was all about just follow a simple process of create a drawing and deliver that drawing out the site and build it, right? So there's quite a shift in the approach from 20 years ago to today and how BIM is. And I think where BIM is right now is I think a little bit across all of the project life cycle, which is great in one sense, but also challenging in another, in that it's quite spread out, the roles. We got VDC roles, we got BIM roles in design. It's getting a little complicated for some teams. So where I think it's going for us anyway in Jacobs is we're looking at really consolidation of our processes, the technology we use, and the way our teams are structured to enable that seamless transition there in the project lifecycle. And then we have finally then the client from the BIM side who are really upskilling. Like the role I had in Australia was really a one-of-a-kind role there around bringing in someone with a BIM background to go and manage from an asset owner point of view. But as we've seen in the last couple of years, we've seen that drive forward a lot more, right? So I think as it goes forward now, more and more asset owners and clients will then fall into that BIM category in managing information the right way with organizations like Dress Sommer and Jacobs. So that's where I think the path forward is probably mostly the owners is the really next step to close that whole of life cycle approach, right?
Yeah, consolidation for sure is the thing to mention because, right now we're at a stage from my point of view where technology is no longer enough. So it's not just about being able to produce some kind of supportive result for the overall project, but it's just to really deliver a value for the project at a certain point in time. And so a lot of clients as well now gained experience. So they really ask for something they not only want to get to know, but that's a real request. And we have to meet the requirements and not just together try out whatever BIM meant like 10 years ago. Yeah. And so, now it's the time to really make the most out of digital construction.
And what is the challenges that you see with somebody joining this industry brand new, fresh, right out of school, right out of university, versus somebody that's coming from a background of project management and joining the VDC side of things?
Probably from a German perspective as well, because I have some relation back to university. I mean, there is still in some areas a quite classic approach to the way teaching goes on. and so they get to know a quite classic idea of what construction and design process could be, and then they face reality. They face what's happening every day, and as well, since right now there is the shift that no longer technology is the main thing. You have a classic view on the topic. You still have something like from the nearer past. Technology is the thing, and you need to find your way at the situation right now.
Yeah, I think so. In the panel discussion that we had earlier, I was mentioning around how we have such a wide variety of tools and solutions and capabilities being offered in the construction industry. But then we have the Gartner report saying that we're the least digitized industry, almost the least digitized industry globally. So there's quite a big disparate, right? So if you're a new person coming in to this industry, you have bombardment of all these different solutions and capabilities that people are more, rightly put it, where it's moving a bit away from that and more around the process and workflow side of it, driving the culture shift. And then you have the element when the person walks out on site and sees paper drawings everywhere. So you get educated. I know I've seen what the courses look like, and you get educated in a really, really, like in my opinion, the right way. But the sites have not caught up, right? The construction industry is really not caught up. So I don't know what it'd be like to be a new starter. I think the benefit for me was I didn't start in BIM in my career, so I learned through different ways. I had my degree. I joined a construction company, went and worked on sites, but not for BIM. And I eventually got to the point where BIM was, or at least digitalization of the construction industry was where I wanted to go. So I got there mid-career in the last few years. I suppose if I was starting fresh, my experiences would be very different if I was dropped straight into BIM. And I actually have a graduate in my team who's doing a phenomenal job, better than I would have done at her age, to actually integrate with our processes, the ways of working, and offer opportunities to change and approach from the young perspective. So I do think there is an element there of it is improving for them, but I know myself that I'd be shocked by the part that isn't digital yet.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that you were just both discussing, is that how did we get behind farming? Farming's the oldest industry in the world, and we're right behind them, and now we're behind them in terms of bringing this technology.
It doesn't make sense.
It does not make sense. And I guess it's the hard-headedness of it. Somebody earlier, I think it was Carl or one of the other guests, they said that it's much more streamlined, in farming. So from beginning to end, you take that idea and they control that whole process all the way to the point.
It's like manufacturing, right?
It's just like manufacturing.
You have a process and you follow that process.
Yeah. So, talking about that and diving a little bit deeper into the manufacturing piece that you just brought out, do you see anything in construction, maybe even in the coordination aspect, that could replicate what manufacturing did years ago?
So the industry that both of us work in quite a bit is around the life science of pharmaceutical industry. So what's interesting about the buildings or the campuses that they create is actually it's a mixture of, labs, research labs, all the way through to manufacturing and warehouses. So they actually have almost everything in one locality. So you kind of get to learn a thing, not just about the digital construction, but also like the processes they implement, the people flow, material flow, how you can't mix waste with. So you learn a lot around how their processes run, right? So we're in a good position to get into exposure to that. And what they do is they operate with very limited wastage in the way they work. Everything has to be set out perfectly. The clean rooms have to be developed perfectly. The researchers need to be able, like we could spend 45 minutes talking about the location of a bin in the model, because it's so important to the researcher that when they're looking down a microscope, they have access to that bin without having to move away from the microscope. And that is removing waste. The time that they would spend to move their eyes away from the microscope, go find a bin and place rubbish in the bin. So taking that into our world, in the digital construction world, it's looking at our processes, the ways that we work, the wastage that we have, in how the churn of information may occur, particularly in the BIM side of it, and driving that down. And in fact, that happens a lot. In Ireland in particular, we have things like Last Planner as a great resource in how we work back from the end goal in construction and work our 6 weeks look ahead schedule from looking back. Okay, we want to be here in 6 weeks' time. Now let's work backwards and figure out how we actually get there. So it is actually improving in the construction industry. And I do think Last Planner was taken out of things like Toyota manufacturing in Japan and how they then their processes. So there's a lot still to learn, but I think we're actually on a pathway there.
Yeah. As well, in our case, we adopt all these kind of strategies. And since I think a good thing about clients from the pharmaceutical area, you can learn a lot about like really investing what adds value for you and cut away stuff that's unnecessary. And since that's a mindset as well, I mean, we can share it and basically follow the same path. I mean, otherwise you, as I said, use technology just for the usage of technology and where should it take you, and it adds process waste as well for the design and the construction. And so there's a lot to learn. So coming back to Last Planner makes sense. Yeah.
I think actually like your presentation that we delivered this morning is very much attuned to that, because that's where Moritz and I met earlier this year, February this year, at a conference. And we discovered that the workflows and processes that we had and the journey that we both end up on individually, we never even knew each other. You know, I learned Dress Sommer when I met Moritz. But the amazing thing was that we discovered this is a problem in both our respective organizations, and we worked through those problems, and we developed, in the end, similar outcomes in removing as much waste from our processes, at least from the BIM side of it, as much as possible, right?
So a lot of parallels since we're both working in life science.
Yeah.
And so coming up with comparable solutions, that was like our eureka moment.
Yeah.
Never met before. And then listening to the presentations of each other, saying, okay, wow, I mean, there's a lot in common. So probably we should talk about it. And this was the plot of our presentation.
What did you call it? Not eureka. You called it something else.
Aha
right?
moment.
The aha moment. Yeah. That's what we had. Right?
Yeah.
So let's address that. I guess that elephant that you guys talked about potentially during your presentation, which is this collaboration effort between the design and the construction. It is a massive industry, and as design contracts change, one of the things that we have to look at as a whole is what does that collaboration look like in the future?
Yeah, I mean, so from contracts point of view, right, there's a few, and Ireland's starting to catch up with like the IPD contract that the US is so familiar with, integrated project delivery, right? So I was actually, when I first moved back to Ireland, the first project I supported Jacobs on was their first IPD project. So we had quite a different avenue of how to tackle coordination compared to the traditional EPCM type of contracts that we'd normally be working in, like with the design and build contracts. Essentially, like with the IPD approach, it was literally 12 companies were doing our job, and we were the integrator, and we had to figure out how we integrate and coordinate 12 organizations as opposed to ourselves and maybe two. So essentially, we had some key differences to how we did the EP processes, but what we did was we actually didn't treat them like different companies. We treated the architectural contractor like our architectural team. We treated the electric. So we integrated as an entire group, and what it created was a different culture, where normally different companies would operate in a sense of, you know, I'm looking at my margin and all I care about is my margin. We're actually all working together as a one team approach, where maybe on the EPCM side of it wasn't as clear. You know, everyone had their margins, they're approaching that, and that's all they wanted. Whereas this was literally everybody needs to come together and work as one team. And that totally changed the mindset in that group. So I think there's been a couple of those IPD projects since in Ireland. And I think for me, it'd be great to see that continue, that process where we break the traditional approaches of design, build, and start to look at more collaborative approaches. And it stood well with the BIM approaches that we had in how we all connect together.
Yeah. And as well, share and participate with project success. So reduce interfaces. I mean, this type of project, as well as like a reduction of interfaces.
Right. So you don't.
Point of view.
So what we did was we actually had our own CDE.
Yeah.
And all the companies hosted an CDE.
Yeah.
And we broke the barriers down of sharing information would be transactional, right? It would be every week you get shared a model for work in progress where it was actually live. Everybody used the live functions of the tools and connected live together, whether that be the architectural firm, the electrical firm, or Jacobs themselves.
And it's not just a technical thing.
No.
I mean, if you break down these barriers, you need to change the way you think about the process.
Right.
Because otherwise, if you at any given moment in time think, okay, this is the latest stage and everything is like published, then it leads to a major misunderstanding. And I guess this is the main thing when it comes to collaboration. The communication aspect and what everyone expects at a certain point in time.
Yeah, I think that's a great lead in to this conversation surrounding, we have contractual stop and start dates on the process of design. And there's this full concept of constructability from the point in which a job starts on a napkin and goes to, GMP or a fixed position and then goes into coordination. One of the questions I have for both of you is that on the constructability side of things, what can we do as a GC to kind of lead that process better? Because I think that in the US, we're having a lot of challenges in leading that.
Yeah, I think so. I think so both of us, like the way I work is right where I'm in design and like Jacob says is design roles and CM construction roles, kind of different to the GC. We basically be the GC's client, right?
Correct.
Same in our case.
Same in GC. So perfect. Yeah. So what I would be saying is, and what we are pushing a lot more these days is many of the times we're not the EPCM on the same project. We might be the engineering procurement team and that would be our role. We support you on construction, right?
Gotcha.
And be different CM, different GC. What I'd be saying is what is happening now is more of that construction team is actually pulling back earlier and earlier into the design and connecting things like, you talk about constructability. So things like move in, move out routes for how we're going to actually install the components and the systems, right? Those sort of things happened much earlier. My team manages the design review approach where we have actually pulled back whoever's in the construction roles, whether that be a Jacobs person or some other entity, will come early. I'm talking about like late basic design,
right,
and actually coordinate, right? And if we don't have that resource, here's the thing: if we don't have that resource yet, or the client hasn't appointed that party yet, we use our own team. We actually bring in our own construction team and actually ensure that what we are designing actually works from not just from a usability perspective, but from a commissioning perspective and an install perspective, right?
So we have this partnering concept, teaming up with a general constructor, and then as well in EPCM projects. Since we do the construction management on our own, we take our own people and basically doing reviews from their point of view because they're the one in the field. And it makes a lot of sense, adds a lot of value. But still, I mean, it's a matter of like understanding, okay, the stage of design where we're at right now. Because if you ask for everything in an early stage, it leads to major confusion and frustration on both sides. So again, communication, it's just
the schedule of information coming from vendors, those sort of things, and having the information available. So like the vendor equipment, we often don't get that till, maybe 4 or 5 weeks before, 60% review and detail design. So therefore, how do you do a constructability? If you don't have the actual,
and that's the contractual agreement,
right,
when these things have to be designed
exactly.
And I think that's a huge part of this is that I think the GC, we push too hard too soon when the design is not properly there yet,
right? And
you don't have to be there. Like you're building this design from scratch and you're working through the process. Now we need to have collaboration in terms of cost and stuff like that as we're working through it. But in the generalities, there's hard stops of the design, SD, DD, CD, and so on and so forth. My question to both of you is, how do you do that in a dynamic modeling situation? Because what we're getting to, it's working for the design side where you have a collaborative environment between the consultants and the architects. There's some challenges, we'll get into that. But if the GC or let's say a combined effort is together in a design build contract, how do we separate the time stops in a dynamic modeling situation?
We actually have to do that already, right? And it is quite complicated because We've modeled freezes that need to happen, and there's a handover, like what you said, based on contractual point of view. So when we do our designs, all but one of our disciplines will produce like LOD 300, 350, and then we'll hand over to that trade partner who will actually then go produce it at LOD 400.
Which is really
and that's
controversial too. What does that mean? What does 400 mean? Because there's no standard.
Well, yeah. We actually use BIM forms.
Yeah. So we're getting there in the US to that point, but in other countries like in Europe, they have that standard.
Yeah. So the point, right? The point of when we've done our 90% review, we've gone IFC, we've ensured that the clashes are all clear. We've ensured that the design issues are all cleared. We've got this package ready to release to the trade partner. From that period, right, we have a process in place that's very well drilled into the teams all the way up to that IFC point. And then we hand over from between IFC and IFF, it gets to quite a gray area. Mm-hmm. For example, when do we swap out? Because maybe only a portion of the Revit model is actually gone IFC, and there's still work because that Revit model could be by the whole level, right? And mechanical systems by the whole level,
right? But
you're only releasing a portion of that.
And you don't know what has changed.
Right.
That's the big challenge. Yeah.
So you've got a portion that needs to be frozen in that model by the designer because the trade contractor has taken that over. Mm-hmm. They're now revving that up to 400 level. Mm-hmm. So then when they're ready to submit to you to say, hey, is this, like, our mechanical engineer's got to check that. You make a change because of X, Y, Z. Maybe your bracketing needs to be wider than the designer's taught, and therefore there's a change. Therefore the airflow could change, and therefore the engineer has to review it. So that process is actually quite defined as well. But when it comes to swapping out the design,
when that as building conditions.
So when do we? So that the challenge we have is being able to add that, maybe that parameter to having that in the support during construction role of adding in. Okay, our designer now will remove the objects out of our native model, and then we'll have a slow transition of the trade. And that's currently what we're doing, but I'm not saying it's straightforward or easy, right? It is quite complicated and relies on people to be lined up correctly to do their roles correctly. So as I said earlier, that part, in my opinion, is a gray area. I don't think I have an answer for you right now because that's actually what we're trying to solve today, right?
Yeah, it was something brought up earlier that essentially goes along this line. I'll get your comments on this. Is that maybe it's kind of like when you stamp the drawings, could you digitally stamp them?
We try to narrow down basically the deviations by talking a lot and handling expectations at a given moment in time, as I said. And probably one could say, okay, why don't you just pin everything that you did?
I didn't want to go to that level, right? Yeah.
But that's not the answer.
No, it's not.
Just saying, okay, that would be the tech approach. Okay, that's it. But there is a lot more that's happening in between.
And are we past clouds on a drawing and a narrative? Where do we go from there?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, the versioning of the models, the versioning of the drawings and stuff like this. I mean, this is still a challenge.
It is.
In as well, like with the packages of deliverables we face in these kind of projects. I mean, and according to the schedule where you have to hand it over. I mean, you can keep track, but there are certain areas where you have to rework all the time.
Right.
Yeah, but you look at is the model king or is the drawing king? And in reality, the published drawings is what we're issuing as let's call them the digitally physical object that's used on sites. But the model is used to generate that drawing, and therefore the model has to be the source of truth. Yeah. And therefore, if the model is updated, your drawing needs to be re-released because the drawing is only a snapshot in time. So that if that process isn't fully aligned between the changes that need to happen in the model,
then you've got a major problem.
You have a major issue, right?
It must come as a
so contractually. Contractually, then if the drawings issued to site, but then the client and the design team decide that it's actually not, it needs to be changed post IFC, it needs to be changed to make the change in the model, but the fabricator is working off of what they think is the latest drawing, but it's not the latest drawing. So contractually, then something gets fabricated, gets erected on site, it's not correct. How do you tackle that? And that's where we are today, right?
And that happens a lot at the 5D level, where people are trying to use the model, and the challenge is overseas across the pond, it's not a contract document. The drawings are the source of truth, right?
Yep.
But the argument always comes down to, like, how did you create the drawings?
Right.
Oh, I created them from the model.
Okay. So then
So
what is the source of truth?
Whenever you send out the drawing, you need to send as well the model.
Yeah, because I mean, at the end of the day, we're taking that concept and we're using the model to make real time decisions.
So up until only maybe a few years ago in Ireland, a trade partner, as part of that grey area I was talking earlier about the IFF deliverable issue for fabrication deliverable, they'd only issue a drawing for.
Right.
It's only in the past couple of maybe 3 years, and like my team has enforced it now in construction that when you're submitting a drawing, you need to submit the model. We need to be able to check the model and make sure it's clash free. Make sure there's no other issues introduced. Make sure it's not deviating from the design. That what they said is the deviations are actually the deviations, as well as then our engineers. Again, using mechanical engineers example, is able to use that model then to do their checks as well. Right?
Yeah, because they'll have a floor plan that the architect is pushing out, and if that doesn't stay updated, or one of the other partners doesn't stay updated, they could be designing off an old part. It's a dynamic process, but then when we have these hard deadlines, you almost have to come to a stop, and it's like, okay, you can't download this version because this is what's by contract. This is what you have to follow.
Yeah.
Because we could go for days. I mean, that's the whole point of the collaboration of the design, is to get all those generative ideas. But when it comes to the final solution of where we're trying to move forward with, that's got to be a hard stop. The next piece of this I want to get into is timelines of construction and design, how they're shrinking. How does that make sense? Because, in the world that we live in, the projects are getting more complex, which takes more time to develop and more time to think through. And then on the back end, we've talked about, farming, construction technology is advancing, but the ways that we build are stagnant, whether it's concrete or steel and how it's put in place or materials that are used in some regards. We really haven't taken a really big step forward in that.
I mean, that is for sure a challenge. I mean, this is why technology can help, but as well the way you tackle the problem from a more conceptual point of view. For example, when it comes to breaking everything up into modules, when it comes to prefabrication, when it comes to strict rules according to how you place stuff in grids, and how basically your whole framework of the project is set up, talking about levels, talking about zones, talking about the way how you basically design, that it's not so widespread, that there is not so much deviation in between single parts. That is a possibility, but still, I mean, there is and will be, I guess, since it's about the topic, a logical breakpoint, which you cannot cross. Because, I mean, it would mean like, okay, you need for a certain stage 3 months for a certain amount of people. Why don't you just triple the amount of people and there you are? But this is not how it works. No. And everyone would agree on this, I guess.
Just because we push that many people out in the field to solve the problem doesn't mean we're actually going to solve the problem.
Just complicating it.
Yeah.
And then, I suppose the projects that we, like Moritz mentioned earlier on, fast track projects, right? And that's where we are today. I mean, I've worked in a few different industries, and one industry was the water industry, and it's very much driven by a process that could take maybe 4 years from feasibility to fully commission and hand over. Whereas in air markets, fast track projects, that same, in fact, even at a much bigger scale, would expect to be done from feasibility to hand over in 2 years, right? So that's one side of it where you're talking about your full design and construction in 2 years. So anything talking about waste again, but anything we can do to remove waste is so important. One of the things that we introduced in construction here in Ireland in our teams, which I'm thinking is getting a bit more common now, but I'll hit you with some numbers as well, right? Where in construction, when it came to installs, a huge portion of the installs from the trades was not matching the design.
Right.
So even when you get the design correct, even when you have a clash free and you've got the entire process down to a T, you hand that onto a trade and they go and build on site. Nothing against them; they got to get their job done, but they deviate. And kind of how they set it out, how they install it, they take a measuring tape and they offset from a grid line. They might offset, instead of offsetting from the center or column.
So what you're saying is we used all this technology to plan it, and then that tape measure comes right back out again.
Right. So what we did was, right, so there's two elements there are two elements to it. You got to correct the problem before it's even happened, right? But what we have tackled at the moment is obviously correcting it after it's happened, where the trade's actually gone and installed. In fact, it was on this IPD project where the trade's gone and installed this on site, and we've taken laser scanning and scanned the actual site.
Check it.
And we've scanned it twice a week. So not scanning it as like an as-built, we've scanned it for progressive verification, right? Where we've looked at augmented reality and things, but nothing could ever give us the same sort of results we got with scanning. Within 24 hours of us capturing that data, we were able to have a stand-up 15-minute session. We did this 3 times a week. We'd have a scan twice a week. We had sessions 3 times a week where we would get the site team, the trades, all together in a coordination meeting.
And have that meeting.
And we'd have raised all the issues of the install errors where they've deviated and gotten it wrong. And we coordinate to make sure that they resolve their issues on site, right?
That back checking of the coordination.
But
because I think that's where we fall down sometimes,
right?
Where we do all this planning and we do this work, but we don't check. We don't go back and almost have an inspection of install.
Right. But here's where the numbers start to come in, which is we're just about finished that project. And what we've discovered, one incident on its own would have cost the client €600,000.
Yeah.
Right. And potentially a 3-month schedule impact. And I say schedule impact because of what you both said earlier around, they'll probably just add a lot more people to it. Instead of it being a 3-month delay, you add 3 times the amount of people and you might save 2 months off it, right?
Right.
But when we've
they might run over each other.
Exactly. And create more chaos.
On top of each other.
Right, yeah. So what we ended up realizing across all of the issues raised, I think we're up to 600 installation hours on a relatively small, this is a very small pharmaceutical project. And almost 200 of those were actually clashing with interfacing, i.e. like cable tray was clashing with duct. The duct wasn't installed yet, but it was going to clash in the future.
Right.
And we solved those issues before. And we did an assessment of it with the project controls, and we estimated a net saving. So taking in all of our time, taking in the client's time, and taking in the scanning effort.
And you get that full return.
We had a net saving around €1.5 million, right? And just this small project, and like a €200 million project, right?
And so imagine doing that on multi-billion or multi-million-dollar project.
It just makes sense because what was amazing out of that one was the culture was very different. Everybody was just, like I said, the whole IPD culture just shifted completely.
Yep.
Where everyone just
saw the value.
Yeah, and they enjoyed what they were doing. It was like, why are you telling us this is wrong?
Or why are you waiting this long to bring me in to have this conversation?
So then everyone just got on with their job. They fixed the issues. They didn't worry about maybe replacing, but the quality improved, safety. And there was one incident that we reckon would have actually injured somebody if we didn't actually catch it. So safety was at an all-time amazing low, right? The issues that were being identified on site because of situations like this. And what I find is this sort of process is not being brought in. So I suppose where we go in the future, I think we're going to try reinforce that with our clients, the value of this.
I think that's where coordination's got to go. It's got to become more collaborative, and it's got to stop being static, and it's got to be more dynamic.
It's a nice example for using, for example, point clouds as a reality check for a reason.
And that's a great lead.
Yeah, for a reason, right? Yeah.
And it's not just because...
It's not just a nice to have,
it is possible, or for something that is right now not this clear, like, for example, a digital twin topic.
Yeah, huge at this conference, huge in the world.
Right.
Talking about that, the first parts of a project, I think the reality capture piece is really important, but it's a visual portion to give you existing context. And I think the more and more that there's technology around reality capture come out, it's going to be supplemented into the coordination efforts that we're already doing. I think that's a big mess right now, whether it's on the reality capture front of collection and then on the existing condition front. Then as the project continuously back checking and stuff like that. And then at the very least too, I think there's been a huge lack of subsurface information and trying to bring that in
or capturing it before it's buried.
Right.
And that's a really important part.
And we're trying to get to a system where we're not just building a project, but we're building a city. Mm-hmm. And if you're going to have a smart city, you got to stop looking at it per project. And the first thing you got to do is you got to put that project on a site that's dynamic and then a whole city environment.
Because that's an ongoing hope, like having this X-ray system. It doesn't matter, but right now it's a matter of a schedule. It's a matter of a nicely set up schedule, and again, then for a reason to really set up a nice digital twin to really use it for maintenance or whatever. Yeah, and not just for
that's the only way
viewing
we're
it.
going to get to to that real digital twin.
Right.
We've got to start with the idea that we can't be forgetting the basics of coordination that are fundamental to what makes coordination start and then go into the building. Because for years, we were always worried about what happened inside. But for some reason, we never thought, oh, by the way, we're building this on the outside.
It's always the same. You set a goal and you check
Right.
if the goal is really fully achieved. Yeah, we as well used, for example, point clouds for really coordination towards MEP, and then checking whether the openings are all coordinated in place before the trades.
And the biggest thing with point
field.
clouds, they were always so large.
Yeah.
And so that you couldn't view them in the field. And that defeats the purpose. You got to get that information into the hands of the people that need it.
Hey, you're both speaking my language here. This was my career early on, right? Surveying was where I started from, reality capture, and I have to say, like in the last
Robotic total stations.
right, all that stuff. But where we've come in the last 10 years is
amazing.
But again, I come back to what I was getting at earlier around. Okay, we have the ability to use things like laser scanning to identify where the installation's wrong, but we really need to solve it at root cause. Why did they install it wrong? Why was it not? Was it maybe the wrong drawing? Was it the wrong set of information? Was it that they just use inaccurate or unusable solutions like offsetting from grid lines and so on? So it's about the sooner we address the root cause of where these errors happen on site, the more efficient things will actually get then.
Yeah, constant learning.
Yeah. So the point cloud for me is a means
if you
to
just
an end,
point into one direction, that would be the same like with the point clouds,
Right.
and you don't trace back what you designed and
Right.
whether it really worked out. Usually, you cannot get better. And so that's the idea as well of coordination. You don't just coordinate to get rid of a problem. You want to really understand the problem and then learn together, teach people what's the origin of the problem, and this is the ultimate goal, because then you really get rid of process waste.
Right, because then you start to look at the lessons learned, right? You start to say, okay, if I had this problem on that project and here it comes again, we got to address that. And this is how we addressed it on the last project. I think the next conversation I wanted to have is, how do we, as this part of the equation of this industry, how do we handle expectations?
Expectations
Of the clients.
from who? Of the
clients,
clients.
of course. I mean, that's the thing. Like, they're pushing us hard in a lot of good ways.
That's good, right? So things don't change because let's just face it, right? Money drives everything, right?
Everything.
Whether we might agree that or not, but that's all. Organizations need to be profitable, need to be making money, and therefore our clients are the ones that are paying us, right?
And their statement is, you have three things: quality, time, and money.
Right.
I can't get one of them.
Yeah.
And anymore. So what do we do to solve that problem?
Yeah. Well, do you want to tackle that one?
No. Do me a favor.
This is a big one from Cody. Right?
Yeah, I know. Just loaded question there.
I suppose. So the expectations, in my opinion, the expectations is a really good thing, right? You talk about the farming, right, and how they're ahead of us, and why is that? But the more our clients are actually driving us to use more advanced, 5 years ago, Jacobs was different to where we are today, because the organization is actually rebranded to Jacobs Solutions, because they recognize that digital is the key to not just construction, but everything that we do, right? And our clients are telling us that as well. So I think we're on the right path, but the expectation is high, but that enables us. Jacobs will not rebrand to Jacobs Solutions unless the client, the people that hold the purses, is actually driving that conversation. So Jacobs is on a really good path, at cutting edge ability, because the clients are directing us that they want to go this way. Our clients are putting out digital requirements that, in one or two instances have scratched my head. But that's great, because none of us know everything. And the fact that I've seen this and I've said, okay, let's address it. And we've spent endless evenings making sure we could comply to it, because it brought our standards up as well. So I'm all for it. Having worked for an asset owner and worked for a client, that's what I did.
Right.
We set the standards, we set the requirements, and all the engineering firms have to actually follow suit.
If there are expectations, that's perfect, because if there are none, you cannot meet them.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's a serious problem, because then everyone is just upset because no one is clear what they expected.
Yeah, and so you have that intent that's been delivered from them, and you're trying to enact that into a physical structure.
But
and there's a lot of challenges there, because clients would say, "Well, what am I really getting with this piece of paperwork that you're giving me?
Yeah.
I'm getting something. I'm going to make money off of what the general contractor is constructing." And it's just it's a very controversial topic, but it's very adversarial. The whole relationship is just off the rails at times like that.
But when you get clear specs,
yes,
that's really good.
Yeah.
But talking about expectations, it needs to be a conversation.
Yes.
To find the best solution for the project.
So, how does analytics impact that? Because that's something that's going to be huge in this industry, is analytics.
I'm talking upfront when you do the setup of the project and the contracting, that sometimes a certain request does not fully meet all the aspects of the project. For example, a super tight schedule,
right?
As well.
We can look at it in different ways, like 4D and stuff like that.
And so it must be an open discussion. Although, I mean, it's clear who's the client and who basically is the one who fulfills the expectations. But still, it needs to be an open conversation, because otherwise you just have a contract no one really relates to.
Right.
Yeah.
Just analytics. Do you want to touch a little more on what you mean by that?
Yeah, I want to go into that just briefly. So analytics is a huge thing in this industry, and you're starting to see it on the back end of how we predict schedule lapses and issues with cost overruns and stuff like that. How do we tie that back with what we did with coordination?
Yeah, I mean, so if you take it right back to the start, right, and analytics and the data of what our clients look in their buildings and what they want their buildings to look like, how they want to be built. There's a lot of data. If you have a client that you've worked with only a few times in the past, you already know roughly what they're looking for. When they ask for, they've built a certain type of facility before, you already have enough information. And I don't think we use that sort of data enough, right? So when you go back to the start, being able to
how to collect it.
Perfect, yeah, how to collect that data, right? But if we have that data, we have it categorized correctly, we're able to generate, in my view, this is where I want us to go, really, is how to generate, because one of the critical part for us is that we don't have a frozen layout of how the layout of the building is going to look like. If we don't have that frozen by the right time, we can't go to planning, we can't get approvals to build on site. It delays. It is one of the most single points of failure on an entire project, right? Yep. And that's where things like the analytics side of it, maybe touching more on the machine learning side of it as a component, and analytics being the output, of being able to look at how our clients actually want their layouts to look at the history of not just what the finished layout was, but how they went through that journey of all the conversations that our architectural team have to ultimately generate that final frozen layout, taking that and finding out how that evolved with a client, and then using that data then in the future to get to that from the start point of when we're starting our layout to get to the end point of our layout as quick as possible, because that then brings along. I mean, that same scenario I just gave you could be used for like 70 different parts of the whole construction process, right? But if you start at the start and you get that part right, everything else just starts to fall in place quicker. I don't think we used it. I really think we're still in the infancy of using data correctly. Regardless of the organization I've come from, I think we're still in the infancy.
Yeah. From this point of view, when you just compare certain projects, for example, in our case, we follow a modular approach. We try to constantly improve our modules according to what we found out over time. And so this is as well a way of lessons learned interpretation.
That's a very good point. So what often happens a lot, I don't know if this is terminology you heard of, stick built.
Oh yeah.
So stick
frame.
Yeah. So stick built is very much just build it on site. You just connect everything up on site and build it on site, and all your raw materials brought to site, right? Modular absolutely is where it's going towards. Off-site manufacturing, that is driving it, in my opinion.
And coordination's going to drive it.
And then the coordination. So having consistent modules, like what you're saying, having consistent modules.
Because then you're going to get into a situation where it's more like manufacturing, and you can start to get better processes.
Exactly. And it's all streamlined, Like
Exactly.
the timber frame industry in the US is all that. It's all done in controlled environments.
Yep.
Why is that not happening more and more in it?
And the commercial
We're getting
sense.
better in Ireland in that we have a lot of factories now are producing it. And in fact, what we do is we take the scanner to the factory.
Yep.
Do a factory accepted a test with the scanner.
Yep.
We make sure that what they've done, and we found errors, but what they've developed in the factory is the modular, because they still got to build it. Whether it's not going to be built on site, but it's built off site, but it still has to be built. It doesn't magically appear. So we're checking that before they get to the site. So by the time they get to the site, we already know it's perfect and it's going to fit into place. And that then reduces so much waste then in construction, where you're not only putting people in danger on site to go and build it, you're in a controlled environment to actually build your component, your module. We're actually checking it, so it's being approved before you even get to the site. And then that team can just go to strike. It's been laid down for like a day, whereas lay down in areas in construction sites could cause huge problems because there's not enough space for it. So you lay down for a day, it's dropped in right. The Toyota model of having it the right time, right? You know what I mean? And then just drop it in. Everything works perfect, and then on to the next module, right?
Yeah.
It groups a lot of aspects.
Yeah.
For sure. I mean, since you don't have widespread coordination, you don't have to tackle single components.
No.
You're working on a module level. You're composing on a module level for the whole process until it's built up. It makes a lot of sense. So that's the way to go.
Well, thank you guys for joining us. It's been a great session.
Thank you.
And have a good time at the rest of the conference.
Look, thanks so much, Cody.
Thank you.
For inviting us. Really
Thanks for
appreciate it.
having us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Take care.